Welcome, friends. This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com, and you are tuned in to the latest episode of The New World Next Week, our long-running weekly video series that gives you the context and the subtext of some of the most important stories going on in the alternative media, the mainstream media, and just open source intelligence in general. James, we'll begin with the drugs this week from Japan Today and from your own Twitter feed at Corbett Report. Afghan opium output soars to record level. Again, Afghanistan's opium production surged this year to record levels despite international efforts over the past decade to wean the country off the narcotics trade, according to a report released Wednesday by the United Nations Drug Control Agency. The harvest this past May resulted in a staggering 5,500 metric tons of opium, 49% higher than last year and more than the combined output of the rest of the world. Even Afghan provinces with some past successes in combating poppy cultivation saw those trends reversed, according to this year's annual UN Office on Drugs and Crime report. And if you jump down to the bottom of the article, James, it notes it wasn't all bad news in this report, which said Afghanistan has expanded its social services to deal with a growing addiction problem at home, which in a way would seem to be a positive thing. But in my mind, all I can think of is the disease industry that we've got set up and running here in the States. James?
Well, exactly right. And again, who can really be surprised by this headline, because it seems to come around pretty much every year, and it certainly hasn't been every single year of the NATO occupation that Afghanistan has hit new record highs in terms of opium production, but it has been, I think, more years than not, it is a new record high, and I'm sick to death of seeing this headline and seeing this exact same excuses being trumpeted every single time about why, oh, well, we just couldn't eradicate this year because the crop was damaged last year, so farmers were trying to make up, and blah, 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 blah. All the same excuses every single time. Opium production continues to hit records every single year. The opium continues to be funneled out by NATO through the auspices of NATO, exactly as the Gladio B plan has it, that we've been talking about with Sibel Edmonds on this program this year. So it just continues to roll on like a freight train, and we have, of course, as always, the mustachioed Geraldos of the corporate prostitute media who are always there to give the interviews to the U.S. Troops that are guarding the opium crops and saying, oh, this must be really hurting your gut to have to do this, but you have to do it in the name of patriotism and Uncle Sam or something like that. And it's absolutely disgusting, and it's going to continue to happen as long as the US and NATO remains in Afghanistan, which they're supposed to pull out next year, but I think we all know that's not going to happen.
James, I forgot to check before we hit the airwaves this time. Surely in our last 4 years of doing New World Next Week, I feel that maybe we've reported on the record output of opium. So I'm assuming that's going to happen, and I'm assuming we'll include that in the show notes, just as well your recent work on the Gladio B operations. And yeah, a link of, Geraldo talking to the troops about guarding the drugs. In a somewhat related note, James, it struck me when we first mentioned the United Nations. I thought, oh, wait, there was some other story this past week at the United Nations. So we'll include that in the relateds from Al Jazeera. U.S. and Israel lose UNESCO voting rights. Both countries stopped paying the UN agency in protest over a 2011 UNESCO decision granting membership to Palestine. So we'll leave that like the other trails that we always do for folks to go research for themselves. Like I said, we'll include all the links for you to check this out. A way for you to get involved in submitting stories, we mention as well using hashtag New World Next Week on Twitter, and one of our favorite story submitters is on Twitter at GJ Salisbury, and he submitted our second story this week. British spy agency GCHQ set up a faked LinkedIn and Slashdot pages to plant malware. German newspaper Der Spiegel reports that the British spy agency GCHQ set up faked LinkedIn and Slashdot pages to plant malware within Belgacom, a Belgian telecommunications company. Using a method called quantum insert, the GCHQ was reportedly able to preempt legitimate access to the websites, redirecting the employees to fake sites that compromised their computers. Der Spiegel reports that the GCHQ and, lest we forget, the NSA were also able to infiltrate the Vienna headquarters of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Companies, better known, rather countries. It's a Freudian slip there, perhaps, OPEC. The report is the latest based on documents provided by whistleblower Edward Snowden. So, the back end. On September 20th, Der Spiegel reported that GCHQ hacked Belgacom under a project codenamed Operation Socialist in order to, quote, enable better exploitation, end quote, of the telecommunications provider. That report referenced the quantum insert method, also known as a man-in-the-middle attack. But today's report reveals that the British spy agency was able to spoof LinkedIn and Slashdot to conduct the operation. Now we get to the companies themselves. A LinkedIn spokesman told The Independent that, quote, we were never told about this alleged activity and we would never approve of it, irrespective of what purpose it was used for, end quote. And Slashdot and their new parent company, Dice Holdings, provided a statement indicating that if any NSA compromises occurred through Slashdot, they were not known to the website's operators until the news was posted to the site itself on this last Sunday night, and we'll include a couple of other links about that. James, I do have a couple of relateds, but I'll throw this back to you. So fake LinkedIn. And so I just got that impression that I looked at it at first thinking it would be to trick users of the website, but it actually sounds like it's getting the employees of the website, James.
Right, yeah, the employees of the telecom, right? Yeah, this is just another remarkable story. Every single piece of this is interesting to me, and I think the bigger point that we should be stressing is, again, it doesn't have to be that every single telecom company in the world is necessarily actively collaborating with these people, because they'll just do man-in-the-middle attacks or whatever they need to do in order to compromise telecoms anywhere in the world. So they can certainly buy off or threaten or intimidate or cajole telecoms in their home countries, but when they move abroad, yeah, they'll do whatever they have to subvert it. And the other, I mean, fascinating part about this, you kind of highlighted their Operation Socialist. What an interesting code name. James, what do you make of this story?
It just seems to be more evidence piled up and piled up and piled up. And I would like to think that it's going to be sort of, hopefully, the white hat nerds at places like Slashdot and LinkedIn, and more like the EFF and groups like that can actually hopefully put the brakes on this kind of operation. But we see, the phone hacking still going on in the UK. The LavaBit fight is actually still going on. I just thought of that as you were speaking, James. Edward Snowden's email provider are still battling it out with the government. I believe Threat Level's reporting that the government has now doubled down on their attacks to try and get all the info from LavaBit. The other interesting thing floating around in the news related to GCHQ, NSA snooping and spying worldwide is the new poll being reported on by Salon, finding American writers self-censoring in the wake of the NSA. PEN America, a nonprofit that works to advance freedom of expression in speech and lit, released a disturbing survey that finds American writers not just increasingly worried about government surveillance as a result of the NSA, but also engaging in self-censorship. Out of the 528 members who responded to the survey, quote, fully 85% are worried about government surveillance of Americans, and 73% of writers have never been as worried about privacy rights and freedom of the press as they are today, James. So again, another... If you look at the opium output soaring as a mission accomplished, I would look at this self-censoring as yet another mission accomplished.
Unfortunately so. What have we got up third?
Our third and final story this week comes from my own Twitter feed at Media Monarchy for an interesting story that I did see trumpeted in the headlines, but fortunately, Food Safety News gives us a little bit of the peek behind the headline. McDonald's and Gerber have not rejected Arctic apples. Recently, the activist group Friends of the Earth, FO, published a release entitled McDonald's and Gerber Say No to GMO Apples. That post had a number of extremely misleading and downright false statements which led to confusion and misunderstanding for readers and media outlets. In a response to letters FO sent to the companies, McDonald's and Gerber, through their parent company, Nestle, replied by explaining they don't use Arctic apples and have no current plans to use them. That is 100% true, but it certainly does not signify a rejection of Arctic apples, and here's why. Arctic apples aren't approved for commercial use in the US and Canada. Neither company has had an opportunity to test Arctic apples, nor are there any apples available for commercial sale. So, in truth, FO's position is a manufactured, deliberately misleading construct to better serve its own motivations. The interesting note, and I think as a whole, food safety news doesn't really seem to be against GMO foods. Now, there are other links that I'll include from op-ed that's a little anti-GMO. But I think it's telling. The last paragraph in this story. The real news story is the fact that after 3.5 years of robust due diligence and rigorous science review, the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service has concluded that Arctic apples are safe for the environment and recommended they be approved for commercial planting. James?
No, we've never used an Arctic apple, never planned to use them, but that's because the hidden truth, the government has yet to approve them. You'll forgive that doggerel, but I just made it up on the fly. But yeah, absolutely, this is, a fundamentally great story for examining the way that we have to always interrogate the basic assumptions of any headline that streams across the news wires. And just because a company denies that they've ever used or plan to use a product doesn't mean they never will, doesn't mean they've ruled it out, doesn't mean that it's off the table for any reason, any good reason. In this case, it just means, well, it hasn't been approved, it hasn't been commercially available yet. And when and if it will, do you really think that McDonald's and the like are going to turn their nose up at it? Of course not. Of course, the plan is to get us all hooked onto these GMO monstrosities and to basically engineer it right into the food pipeline. So again, it's very good to keep your skeptical hat on whenever you see these types of stories, whether they confirm what you believe or disconfirm. I think you should go and interrogate the sources and take a look at what they're actually saying and what the actual truth is. This is just another great example of that. So my hat's off to Food Safety News for putting this together.
James, let me throw in two other interesting notes related to Food World Order topics. And by way of Red Ice Radio, factory forests, as the USDA considers approval of genetically engineered trees, and that aforementioned positive op-ed from Food Safety News on the industry's secret plan to get the feds to kill GMO labeling in every state. This is interesting. The dirty details contained in industry documents obtained from the Washington State Attorney General's office in the wake of a lawsuit brought against the Grocery Manufacturers Association for illegally concealing donors to the No on 522 campaign. Longtime watchers of New World Next Week know we've discussed Washington's recently defeated No on 522, the labeling of genetically modified foods. This now, James, is looking like the same sort of situation we had here in Portland, where they tried to ram fluoride down our throats, and we started to scratch and discover that it was all built on shady with secret meetings and undisclosed donors, and it's looking like the same kind of situation is happening again.
That's right. Well, we should mention as of next week, there's not going to be a New World next week because I'm going to be out of town, out of the country. I'm going to be in France attending the FOSSA 2013 conference in Lille. So anyone who happens to be in the area, by all means, register and join us. It should be an interesting conference. I'm going to be talking about open source journalism. That means I won't be here. I won't be doing anything on the website next week, except, of course, people know next week is 11/22/2013, the 50th anniversary of JFK. So I'm going to do my best to try to get the video that I wanted to put up on the 50th anniversary ready so that it will actually appear on the website on Friday the 22nd. So please keep your eye out for that, and I'll do my best to do it. Otherwise, there will be a podcast, or I'm planning to do a podcast tomorrow if I can squeeze that in. That should also be along the JFK lines. So that's just my little deprogramming note. No New World next week, but I will be back and working on the website by the last week of November.
All right, and so this has been episode 173 of the New World Next Week. James, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.